The first light of dawn painted the Wyoming sky in hues of amber and gold as Zhen Ouyang stood alone at the dusty train station, her small valise clutched tightly in trembling hands. The year was 1882, and she had traveled farther from home than she'd ever imagined possible. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she surveyed the unfamiliar landscape, searching for the man who was to become her husband, a stranger whose photograph she had memorized during the long journey from China. The station was nearly empty now, the few passengers who had disembarked with her already collected by waiting family members or disappeared into the small frontier town of Copper Creek. Zhen adjusted the high collar of her silk kipao, the vibrant red fabric a stark contrast to the muted browns and grays of her surroundings. The traditional Chinese wedding dress had been her mother's final gift before Zhen boarded the ship that would take her across the vast Pacific Ocean. "You must be waiting for someone," said the station master, a gray-bearded man who had been watching her with curiosity. "Who you looking for, miss?" Zhen's English was limited but carefully rehearsed. "Mr. Wang, businessman, Laramie Street." The station master scratched his head. "Wang. Ain't no Wang in these parts that I know of. Laramie Street's over in Sweetwater, not here in Copper Creek." His brow furrowed as understanding dawned. "Oh lordy, miss, I think you got off at the wrong stop." The blood drained from Zhen's face as the man's words sank in. The train had made several stops during the night, and she had been so exhausted that when a porter had shaken her awake calling out what sounded like her destination, she had hurriedly gathered her belongings. "Next train to Sweetwater?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. The station master's sympathetic expression told her everything before he spoke. "Not for 3 days, miss. The line only runs twice a week out here." Tears welled in Zhen's eyes. She was alone in a strange land with little money and nowhere to go. The matchmaker had warned her that any deviation from the arranged meeting could result in the marriage contract being voided. Her future husband might assume she had changed her mind, or worse, that she was unreliable. "Is there hotel?" she asked hopefully. "There's the Wayfarer's Inn, but it ain't cheap," the station master replied. "You got enough money to wait 3 days." Zhen counted the few American dollars she had converted before leaving China. It wouldn't be enough for 3 nights, meals, and a new train ticket. She shook her head, despair threatening to overwhelm her. The station master was about to speak again when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A tall man on horseback came into view, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the rising sun. He wore a dust-covered hat pulled low over his eyes and a worn leather vest over a simple cotton shirt. As he drew closer, Zhen could see that his face was weathered from years under the prairie sun, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Morning, Dale," the station master called out. "What brings you to town so early?" Dale Oakley dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent most of his life on horseback. "Came to pick up some seed and supplies." His gaze shifted to Zhen, and for a moment he seemed transfixed by the sight of her standing there in her bright red wedding dress, looking as out of place as a rose in a desert. "This young lady here's got herself in a pickle," the station master explained. "Got off at the wrong stop. Supposed to be in Sweetwater, meeting her husband-to-be." Dale's expression softened as he took in Zhen's distress. "That's a mighty long way from here," he said, his voice gentle. "And no train for days, I reckon." Zhen met his gaze, surprised by the genuine concern she saw there. In her limited English, she explained her situation, her hands gesturing anxiously as she spoke. Dale listened carefully, then turned to the station master. "Can you send a telegram to Sweetwater? Let this Mr. Wang know what happened," the station master nodded. "Sure can, but who knows if he'll get it in time, and where's she supposed to stay meanwhile?" Dale looked back at Zhen, then at his horse, then at the open country beyond the town. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he made a decision. "I've got a spare room at my ranch," he said. "It's humble, but it's clean. You're welcome to stay there until the next train, miss." Zhen blinked in surprise. The offer was unexpected and in her culture highly improper, yet she had little choice. This strange land didn't operate by the same rules as her homeland, and she was in desperate need of help. "I'm Dale Oakley," he said, removing his hat and extending a calloused hand. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here." "Zhen Ouyang," she replied, bowing slightly instead of taking his hand. "I am." Grateful, Dale nodded, understanding her reluctance. "The telegram will let your intended know where you are. If he's a decent man, he'll either come fetch you or wait for the next train." As Zhen considered his offer, she noticed the station master giving Dale an approving nod. That small gesture of community trust helped ease her fears. With trembling hands, she wrote out a message for Mr. Wang, explaining the situation and providing Dale Oakley's name and location as given to her by the station master. Dale loaded her valise onto his horse, and with the utmost courtesy, helped her mount. She sat side saddle, unused to riding astride, especially in her traditional dress. As Dale swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance, Zhen felt a curious mix of fear and relief. The horse began to move, carrying her away from the station and deeper into this strange new land, and into a future that had suddenly become even more uncertain. The Oakley Ranch was smaller than Zhen had anticipated, but neatly kept. A modest one-story cabin with a front porch stood beneath the spreading branches of two ancient cottonwood trees. Behind it, a barn and corral housed several horses and what looked like a milk cow. Fields of what Zhen assumed were wheat or corn extended into the distance, golden under the midday sun. "It's not much," Dale said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it's home." Zhen took in the sight of the ranch with wide eyes. Though humble compared to the grand house she had been promised in her marriage arrangement, there was something inviting about the Oakley homestead. Wildflowers grew along the path to the front door, and the porch held two hand-carved rocking chairs facing the distant mountains. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. A shadow of a smile crossed Dale's face, the first she had seen since meeting him. "Been working this land for 8 years now. Started with nothing but determination and a bad case of foolishness." He led her inside, where the main room served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple but sturdy furniture filled the space. Everything was meticulously clean, though certainly masculine in its sparseness. "Guest rooms through there," Dale said, gesturing to a door off the main room. "Used to be my brother's before he moved to California. Bathrooms out back, it's just an outhouse, I'm afraid." "We haul water from the well for washing." Zhen nodded, trying not to show her dismay at the primitive facilities. The matchmaker had assured her that her future husband was wealthy, with a modern home that included indoor plumbing, a luxury she had been particularly looking forward to after hearing about such marvels. "I'll give you some time to settle in," Dale said. "There's a wash basin in your room." "I've got chores to tend to, but I'll be back to fix us some lunch in a bit." After he left, Zhen sat on the edge of the narrow bed, finally allowing herself a moment of complete vulnerability. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as the enormity of her situation struck her. She was thousands of miles from home, in a strange land with strange customs, and now even the security of her arranged marriage seemed in jeopardy. What if Mr. Wang refused to accept her after this mishap? What if he saw it as a sign of carelessness or, worse, as a deliberate slight? Her family had invested everything they had to send her to America for this marriage. Failure was not an option. She wiped her tears and moved to the small window. Outside, she could see Dale working in the corral, his movements efficient and purposeful as he mended what appeared to be a section of fence. There was something reassuring about his quiet competence, about the way he had offered his help without hesitation or expectation. Zhen changed out of her wedding dress, carefully folding the silk garment and placing it in her valise. She put on a simpler kippah of blue cotton, more suitable for everyday wear. After washing her face in the basin, She took a deep breath and stepped out to offer her assistance with lunch, the least she could do to repay his kindness. She found Dale in the kitchen, slicing bread. He looked up as she entered and for a moment seemed at a loss for words. "I help," Zhen said, moving toward the counter. "I cook in China. Very good." Dale hesitated, then stepped aside. "I was just making sandwiches, nothing fancy." Zhen examined the ingredients he had laid out: bread, some cured meat, cheese, and what looked like pickled vegetables. It was all unfamiliar, but she was determined to learn. With gestures and halting English, she asked questions about each item, and Dale patiently explained. As they worked side by side preparing the simple meal, an unexpected ease developed between them. Dale spoke slowly, using simple words, and Zhen found herself understanding more than she expected. When she accidentally knocked over a jar of pickles, they both reached to catch it at the same time, their hands briefly touching. A jolt of awareness passed through Zhen, surprising and confusing her. "Sorry," she said quickly, withdrawing her hand. "No harm done," Dale replied, but she noticed a slight flush on his tan cheeks. They ate on the porch, watching the distant mountains shimmer in the afternoon heat. Dale told her about his ranch, how he had built it from nothing after coming west with his brother following the Civil War. He spoke of the challenges and rewards of ranch life, of drought years and bountiful harvests, of the community that had slowly accepted him as one of their own. Zhen listened, fascinated by this glimpse into a life so different from what she had expected in America. When he asked about her journey, she told him of leaving her village near Guangzhou, of the long sea voyage, of her hopes and fears. "Why did you agree to marry a man you've never met?" Dale asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Zhen considered the question carefully. "In China, marriage is arrangement for family honor, for better life." She paused, searching for the right words. "I see photograph. Mr. Wang is older but has good business. Matchmakers say he want Chinese wife who know traditions." Dale nodded thoughtfully. "And what do you want, Zhen Ouyang?" The question startled her. No one had ever asked what she wanted. Her life had been a series of duties and obligations, decisions made for her by her family and circumstances. What did she want? "I want safe place. Good home." She hesitated, then added softly, "Maybe someday, love." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared loneliness, of dreams deferred. The moment was broken by the sound of an approaching wagon. Dale stood, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, a gesture Zhen hadn't noticed before. "Stay here," he said, moving to the edge of the porch. The wagon came into view, driven by an older woman with silver-streaked hair tied back in a practical bun. Beside her sat a younger woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with a friendly face and a basket on her lap. Dale visibly relaxed. "It's just Martha Wilson and her daughter Emily from the neighboring ranch," he explained to Zhen. "They sometimes bring by baked goods or extra vegetables. Good folks." The women's curious gazes fell immediately on Zhen as they approached. Dale stepped forward to greet them, explaining the situation with remarkable candor. Zhen stood awkwardly on the porch, unsure of the proper protocol for such an introduction in America. Martha Wilson, a sturdy woman with kind eyes, climbed down from the wagon and approached Zhen with a warm smile. "You poor dear," she said, taking Zhen's hands in her own weathered ones. "What a predicament! But you're in good hands with Dale Oakley. He's the most honorable man in these parts." Emily followed with the basket, which contained freshly baked bread and a jar of preserves. "We came to invite Dale to our harvest dinner next week, but it seems he has more important matters to attend to," she said, casting a speculative glance between Dale and Zhen. "Mrs. Ouyang is just staying until the next train to Sweetwater," Dale explained firmly. "I'm merely offering assistance to a traveler in need." "Of course," Martha said, though her tone suggested she found the situation intriguing. "Well, we won't intrude. But if you need anything, Miss Ouyang, anything at all, our ranch is just over that rise to the east." After they departed, Dale looked slightly embarrassed. Word will be all over the county by sundown, he said. Small communities like this don't get much excitement. They think improper. Zhen asked, suddenly concerned about her reputation. Dale shook his head. The Wilsons are good people. They won't spread malicious gossip. But, he hesitated, you should know that in these parts an unmarried woman staying with an unmarried man might raise eyebrows. Zhen felt her cheeks grow warm. In China, very improper. Here too, generally speaking, Dale admitted. But these are unusual circumstances, and folks around here understand that sometimes the proper thing and the right thing aren't the same. As the afternoon wore on, Dale showed Zhen around the ranch. He introduced her to the animals, his faithful horse Traveler, the milk cow Bessie, and a small flock of chickens that scattered comically at their approach. Zhen was particularly fascinated by the vegetable garden behind the house, which contained some familiar plants alongside many she didn't recognize. You grow vegetables yourself? She asked, impressed. In China, such work would typically be done by women or hired laborers. Dale nodded. Can't always get to town for supplies, especially in winter. A man learns to be self-sufficient out here. Zhen knelt to examine a plant with long green leaves. This like Chinese vegetable, we call it jiyukai. That's garlic chives, Dale said. Good in eggs and soups. You know how to cook with it? Zhen nodded enthusiastically. I show you. That evening, Zhen prepared a simple meal using Dale's garden vegetables and some dried beef. The kitchen tools were unfamiliar, the iron stove temperamental, but she adapted quickly. Dale watched with undisguised admiration as her deft hands transformed basic ingredients into something aromatic and appetizing. This is the best meal I've had in years, he declared after the first bite. You have a gift, Zhen Ouyang. She ducked her head at the compliment, but pleasure warmed her from within. It felt good to be useful, to share something of her own culture in this foreign place. As they cleaned up after dinner, Zhen found herself studying Dale when he wasn't looking. He was older than she was, perhaps in his early 30s, with streaks of silver at his temples that spoke of a life filled with both hardship and wisdom. His hands were calloused from work, his face tanned and lined from years under the sun, but there was a gentleness about him that she found increasingly compelling. How you learn Chinese vegetable? She asked as they dried the dishes. Dale's expression grew distant. During the Civil War, I served with a man named Lai. He was from California, born to Chinese immigrants, smart as a whip and brave as they come. He taught me a few words of Cantonese and told me about his mother's cooking. He paused, a shadow crossing his face. He didn't make it home. After the war, when I decided to start fresh out west, I remembered the vegetables he described and ordered some seeds. Zhen was touched by the story and by Dale's quiet commemoration of his friend. You good man, Dale Oakley, she said softly. Their eyes met, and for a moment the kitchen seemed to fade away. Dale cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. It's getting late, he said. You must be tired after your journey. We should turn in. That night, lying in the narrow bed in the guest room, Zhen listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie night, the whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves, the distant howl of what might have been a coyote, the occasional creak of the house settling. Her thoughts were a tumultuous mix of anxiety about her future and unexpected warmth when she thought of Dale's kindness. What would happen when the train came? Would Mr. Wang still want her after this mishap? And why did that question suddenly fill her with such conflicting emotions? The next morning, Zhen awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in another simple kipao and went to offer her help with breakfast. Dale had already prepared a pot of coffee and was mixing batter for what he called flapjacks. His hair was damp from washing and he had shaved, his jaw smooth and defined in the morning light streaming through the window. Good morning, he said, smiling at her. Sleep well? Yes, thank you, she replied, though in truth she had tossed and turned for hours. They worked together preparing breakfast, moving around the small kitchen with surprising coordination, as if they had done this many times before. When Dale accidentally bumped into her, his hand briefly touched her waist to steady her, and that same jolt of awareness passed through her. After breakfast, Dale mentioned that he needed to check on a section of fencing in the north pasture. "Would you like to come along?" he asked. "I could teach you to ride." The idea both terrified and exhilarated Zhen. In China, she had never ridden a horse, such activities being considered unsuitable for a woman of her station. But America was different, and she was curious about this aspect of ranch life. "Yes," she said, summoning her courage. "I would like learn." Dale's smile was worth the momentary fear. He found a pair of trousers that had belonged to his brother, which Zhen modified with quick stitches to fit her smaller frame. Wearing them felt scandalously improper, but also strangely liberating. Dale was a patient teacher, showing her how to approach Bessie, the gentlest of his horses, how to mount and hold the reins. His hands were steady and respectful as he guided her, never lingering longer than necessary but somehow leaving an imprint of warmth wherever they touched. By mid-morning, Zhen was riding beside Dale across the open pasture, her initial terror replaced by a giddy sense of freedom. The vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above them, and the rolling prairie seemed to extend to the very edge of the world. For the first time since arriving in America, Zhen felt a sense of possibility that had nothing to do with her arranged marriage. "You're a natural," Dale said as they stopped to rest the horses beside a small creek. "Most folks take days to get comfortable in the saddle." Zhen smiled, pleased by his praise. "You good teacher." They dismounted to let the horses drink, and Dale spread his coat on a grassy spot for them to sit. He pulled a canteen and some jerky from his saddlebag, offering both to Zhen. As they sat side by side, watching the horses and the play of sunlight on the creek water, Zhen found herself wanting to know more about this quiet, competent man who had so unexpectedly entered her life. "You never marry?" she asked, then immediately worried she had overstepped. "Sorry, not proper question." Dale didn't seem offended. "It's all right. No, I've never married. Came close once before the war, but she married someone else while I was away fighting." He took a drink from the canteen. "After that, I guess I just focused on building something of my own. The right woman never came along, or maybe I wasn't looking hard enough." Zhen considered his words. "In China, matchmaker find husband or wife. Here you must find yourself," Dale nodded. "That's generally how it works, though some folks still use matrimonial advertisements in newspapers or have family arrange introductions." "How you know? Right person?" Zhen asked, genuinely curious. Dale gazed at the distant mountains. "I reckon you just know. Something clicks into place, like finding the missing piece of a puzzle you've been working on your whole life." He glanced at her, then quickly away. "At least, that's what my mother used to say." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Zhen found herself wondering what it would be like to choose her own husband, to marry for love rather than family obligation. The concept was both frightening and enticing. After checking and repairing the fence, they rode back to the ranch. Dale taught Zhen how to unsaddle and groom Bessie, explaining the importance of caring properly for the animals that made ranch life possible. "They're not just tools," he said as Zhen brushed Bessie's coat. "They're partners. Treat them well and they'll never let you down." There was something deeply appealing about Dale's philosophy, about the respect with which he treated everything around him: the land, the animals, and Zhen herself. It was so different from the hierarchical world she had left behind, where worth was determined by wealth and status. That afternoon, a sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. The sky darkened to an ominous purple-gray, and lightning flashed across the horizon. Dale hurried to secure loose items around the ranch and move the animals to shelter. Zhen watched in awe as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a torrential downpour. In Guangzhou, rain was common, but nothing like this wild, untamed deluge that seemed to transform the landscape before her eyes. "Best get inside," Dale called over the rising wind. "These prairie storms can turn dangerous fast." They rushed to the house just as hail began to fall, pelting the roof with a sound like 1,000 tiny hammers. Inside, Dale lit lanterns against the growing darkness and stoked the fire in the hearth. "We might lose power," he explained, seeing Zhen's questioning look at the lanterns. "The telephone and electric lines don't always survive these storms." Sure enough, minutes later, the single electric bulb hanging from the kitchen ceiling flickered and went dark. The house was now illuminated only by firelight and the warm glow of the lanterns, creating an intimate atmosphere that made the small space seem both smaller and somehow more expansive. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making Zhen jump. Dale noticed her discomfort and, with gentle consideration, began telling her about the science of thunderstorms, explaining how the clash of warm and cold air created the dramatic displays. "Some of the old-timers say that thunder is just the sound of angels bowling in heaven," he added with a small smile. "My mother preferred that explanation to the scientific one." Zhen laughed, relaxing a little. "In China, we say thunder is dragon's anger." "I like that," Dale said. "Seems fitting for something so powerful." As the storm raged outside, they sat before the fire, sharing stories of their childhoods and the different worlds that had shaped them. Dale spoke of growing up in Ohio, the son of a blacksmith, of joining the Union Army at 18 with dreams of adventure and righteousness, only to discover the grim reality of war. Zhen told him of her family's tea shop in Guangzhou, of learning to read and write against her grandfather's wishes, of her mother's quiet determination that Zhen would have opportunities she herself had never known. "That's why you agreed to the arranged marriage?" Dale asked. "For opportunity." Zhen nodded. "America is dream, new beginning. My family sacrificed much for me to come. And now," Dale's voice was soft, barely audible over the storm, "is it what you dreamed?" Zhen looked around at the cozy cabin, at this man who had welcomed a stranger into his home without hesitation, at the wild beauty of the land she had glimpsed. "Different," she said honestly, "but not bad different." Their eyes met across the firelit space, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that sometimes fate worked in mysterious and unexpected ways. The storm continued well into the evening, forcing them to prepare dinner by lantern light. Zhen taught Dale how to make simple dumplings using ingredients from his pantry. The process was messy and punctuated by laughter as Dale's large fingers struggled with the delicate folding technique. "You're a patient teacher," he said, echoing her earlier compliment as they sat down to eat their creation. "You good student," she replied with a smile. After dinner, with the storm still howling outside, Dale took down a battered chess set from a shelf. "Do you play?" he asked. Zhen brightened. "Yes, my father teach me. We call Zhianqi in China." Though the rules of Western chess differed somewhat from the Chinese version she knew, Zhen quickly adapted. They played several games at the kitchen table, the lantern casting long shadows across the board. Dale won the first game, Zhen the second, and the third ended in a draw that had them both leaning over the board in concentration, oblivious to the passing hours. It was only when a particularly loud crack of thunder startled them both that they realized how late it had grown. The fire had burned down to embers, and the storm, while still present, had lessened in intensity. "We should get some rest," Dale said, reluctantly beginning to pack away the chess pieces. "Tomorrow's another day." As Zhen stood to help, their hands brushed over the chessboard. Instead of pulling away, Dale's fingers gently closed around hers for just a moment, a touch so brief she might have imagined it, yet so meaningful that her heart raced. "Good night, Zhen Ouyang," he said softly. "Good night, Dale Oakley," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. In her room, listening to the storm gradually subsiding outside her window, Zhen pressed her fingers to her lips, wondering at the emotions swirling within her. She had come to America to marry a stranger, only to find herself drawn to a different stranger entirely, one who had shown her kindness, respect, and something else she couldn't quite name, but that made her feel both vulnerable and strangely powerful. What was happening to her carefully laid plans? And why didn't that terrify her as much as it should? The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Dale was already outside when Zhen emerged from her room, assessing any damage the storm might have caused. She found him mending a section of the chicken coop's roof that had partially collapsed under the weight of the hail. "Need help?" she called, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. Dale looked up, his face breaking into a smile that made her heart skip. "Good morning." "I wouldn't say no to an extra pair of hands." Zhen held boards in place while Dale hammered, their bodies close in the confined space of the small coop. She was acutely aware of his presence, the scent of soap and leather that clung to him, the controlled strength in his movements, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "The train comes tomorrow," Dale said suddenly, his hammer pausing mid-swing. Zhen felt a curious hollowness open up inside her at his words. "Yes," she replied, unable to say more. They worked in silence for several minutes, the only sound the rhythmic striking of the hammer and the clucking of the chickens around their feet. "What will you do?" Dale finally asked. "If you get to Sweetwater and Mr. Wang has changed his mind." It was a possibility Zhen had been trying not to contemplate. "I not know," she admitted. "Return to China maybe, but family use all money for passage here." Dale drove in the final nail with more force than necessary. "You could stay," he said, not looking at her. "Not here, I mean, in America. There are opportunities for someone as clever and hardworking as you." "Where I go?" Zhen asked softly. "Who hire Chinese woman with little English?" Dale finally met her gaze. "There are options. The Wilsons mentioned they've been looking for help with their boarding house in town. Martha took a shine to you." Zhen was touched that he had been thinking about her future. "You are kind man, Dale Oakley." He shook his head. "Not particularly. Just don't like the idea of anyone being trapped in a situation with no way out." After finishing the repairs, they walked back to the house together. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words and emotions neither quite knew how to express. Zhen spent the afternoon helping Dale with various chores around the ranch tasks that would normally have taken him all day, but were completed in half the time with her assistance. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and developing a wordless communication that felt both natural and extraordinary. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Dale suggested they take a walk to his favorite spot on the property, a small rise that offered a view of the surrounding countryside. The evening air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers as they followed a narrow path through a meadow. Fireflies had begun to emerge, their tiny lights blinking like earthbound stars around them. "We call them fire insects in China," Zhen said, watching the magical display. "Symbol of passionate love in poetry." Dale glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Here, some folks say they're the souls of loved ones watching over us." They reached the top of the rise, where a single cottonwood tree stood sentinel. The view was breathtaking, rolling prairie stretching to distant mountains, painted in the gold and purple hues of sunset. Below them, the ranch house looked small but welcoming, smoke curling from its chimney. "This is where I decided to build my home," Dale said, his voice soft with memory. "I'd been traveling for weeks after leaving the army, not sure where I was headed. When I saw this view at sunset, something just clicked. I knew I was home." Zhen understood perfectly. Even in the short time she had been here, she had felt a connection to this wild, beautiful land so different from the crowded streets and carefully tended gardens of her homeland, yet somehow speaking to something deep within her. "It is a good place," she said simply. They stood side by side in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a final blaze of glory. As darkness fell, the stars emerged, more stars than Zhen had ever seen, filling the vast prairie sky with light. "Make wish," she said, pointing upward. "In China, stars are wishes." Dale looked at her, his face half in shadow. What would you wish for, Zhen Ouyang? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Zhen found herself unable to voice the answer that had unexpectedly formed in her heart, that she wished for more time here with him, in this place that already felt more like home than she could have imagined. Instead, she said, "Clear path. Know what is right." Dale nodded as if he understood exactly what she meant. That's a good wish. As they walked back to the ranch, their hands brushed accidentally, then deliberately, until Dale's fingers gently entwined with hers. Neither spoke of it, but Jen felt as though something momentous had just occurred, as if by that simple touch, they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. That night, after a quiet dinner, they sat on the porch watching the stars and speaking of inconsequential things, both avoiding the subject of tomorrow's train and what it would bring. When Jen finally rose to retire for the night, Dale stood as well, looking down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Jen," he began, then hesitated, searching for words. "I want you to know that whatever you decide tomorrow, you've brought something special to this place. To my life." Jen felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved me at station, give me home when I lost." "No," Dale said softly, "you weren't lost. You were exactly where you were meant to be." The words hung between them, laden with meaning. For a moment, Jen thought he might reach for her, might bridge the small distance that separated them. Instead, he stepped back, respect and uncertainty warring in his expression. "Good night," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good night," she replied, carrying the weight of unspoken feelings with her into the darkness of the house. Sleep eluded Jen that night. She lay awake, her mind racing with impossible choices and unexpected desires. She had come to America with a clear purpose: to honor her family's wishes, to secure her future through marriage to a successful businessman. How could 3 days on a remote ranch with a quiet cowboy have shaken those foundations so completely? And yet, she couldn't deny the truth that had been growing inside her since the moment Dale Oakley had appeared at the train station like some guardian spirit. She felt more herself in his presence than she ever had before. With Dale, she wasn't just a Chinese bride, a commodity in an arranged marriage, but Zhen Ouyang, a woman with thoughts and skills and value all her own. The dawn found her still awake, no closer to knowing what path she should take. As the first light filtered through her window, Jen rose and dressed in her red wedding kipao, the garment she had journeyed so far in, the symbol of her promise to Mr. Wang. The kitchen was empty when she entered, but coffee bubbled on the stove and the table was set for breakfast. Through the window, she could see Dale in the barn, preparing the wagon that would take them to town for the train. Jen moved automatically, preparing a simple breakfast of eggs and toast. By the time Dale entered, stomping dust from his boots at the door, she had the meal on the table. "You're wearing your wedding dress," he observed, his voice carefully neutral. Jen nodded. "For Mr. Wang, show respect." Dale's expression revealed nothing as he sat down to eat. They ate in silence, the weight of the coming separation pressing down on them both. After breakfast, Dale loaded Jen's valise into the wagon while she took one last look around the small cabin that had, in just 3 days, come to feel like a sanctuary. Each object seemed to hold a memory now: the chess set on the shelf, the rocking chairs on the porch, the iron stove where she had cooked alongside Dale. "Ready?" Dale asked from the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. "Yes," Jen replied, though nothing could have been further from the truth. The journey to town was filled with tense silence, broken only by Dale's occasional comments about the land they passed or instructions to the horses. Jen sat beside him on the wagon seat, acutely aware of his proximity and the growing ache in her chest at the thought of never seeing him again. As they approached Copper Creek, Dale finally spoke of what lay ahead. "I sent a telegram yesterday letting Mr. Wang know you'd be on today's train. If all goes well, he'll be waiting for you in Sweetwater." Jen nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "If he's not," Dale continued, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, Or if anything isn't as it should be, you can always return to Copper Creek. The Wilsons would gladly give you work and a place to stay until you decide what you want to do. Thank you, Zhen managed, touched by his concern for her welfare. The train station came into view, busy with more activity than when Zhen had arrived 3 days earlier. Market day, Dale explained, when ranchers and farmers from the surrounding area came to town to sell their goods and purchase supplies. Dale helped Zhen down from the wagon, then retrieved her valise. They stood awkwardly on the platform, surrounded by the bustle of station activity, yet somehow isolated in their private farewell. Your train should be here in about 20 minutes, Dale said, checking the large clock that hung above the station master's office. Zhen nodded, clutching her valise with white-knuckled hands. Dale Oakley, she began, then faltered, the English words she needed escaping her in this moment of emotion. Dale waited patiently, his eyes never leaving her face. I not forget, she finally said, your kindness, your home. She hesitated, then added softly, you. Something flickered in Dale's eyes, a flash of emotion quickly controlled. Nor I you, Zhen Ouyang. The station master's voice cut through the moment, announcing the imminent arrival of the train to Sweetwater and beyond. Around them, passengers began gathering their belongings, saying farewells to those seeing them off. I should purchase your ticket, Dale said, moving toward the ticket window. Left alone momentarily, Zhen looked around at the small frontier town that had been the site of such an unexpected detour in her carefully planned journey. 3 days ago, she had stood on this very platform, terrified and alone. Now, she was leaving with a heart full of conflicting emotions and the strange sense that she was heading away from, rather than toward, her true destination. Dale returned with her ticket, handing it to her along with a small cloth-wrapped package. Some food for the journey, he explained. And a little extra money just in case. Zhen started to protest, but Dale shook his head. Please, it would ease my mind to know you have it. The distant whistle of the approaching train cut through the air, signaling the imminent end of their time together. Around them, the platform became a flurry of activity as passengers prepared to board. Zhen, Dale said urgently, taking her free hand in his. I know you have obligations, promises made before we ever met. I would never ask you to dishonor those commitments. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. But I would be dishonoring my own heart if I didn't tell you that these 3 days have been the most alive I've felt in years. If circumstances were different, the train whistle sounded again, closer now, the ground beginning to vibrate with its approach. If circumstances were different, Zhen finished for him, her voice barely audible over the growing noise, I stay, with you. Their eyes met in perfect understanding too late, too impossible, yet too real to deny. The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a billow of steam. Doors opened, passengers disembarked, and the conductor called for all those traveling to Sweetwater to board. Goodbye, Zhen Ouyang, Dale said, releasing her hand. May you find happiness, whatever path you choose. Zhen stepped toward the train, then paused, turning back to look at Dale one last time. He stood tall and straight, his expression composed except for the depth of emotion in his eyes. With a heavy heart, Zhen boarded the train, finding a seat by the window that faced the platform. Dale remained where she had left him, watching as other passengers filed past him onto the train. The final boarding call came. The conductor moved along the platform, closing doors. The whistle sounded a warning. In moments, the train would pull away, carrying Zhen to Sweetwater, to Mr. Wang, to the future that had been arranged for her. Through the window, she could still see Dale, his figure growing smaller as the train began to move. Something broke inside Zhen, a dam of propriety, of obligation, of fear, releasing a flood of certainty that washed away all doubt without conscious thought. She was on her feet, pushing past surprised passengers toward the door. The conductor tried to stop her, but Zhen was fueled by a determination stronger than any she had ever known. Miss, you can't, the conductor began, but Zhen was already leaping from the moving train, her red dress billowing around her as she landed on the platform with surprising grace. Zhen. Dale's voice cut through the chaos, and then he was there, catching her arms to steady her. "What are you doing?" The train gathered speed, pulling away from the station with a mournful whistle, but Zhen barely noticed. She looked up at Dale at the disbelief and dawning hope in his eyes. "I choose," she said simply. "I choose my path, I choose here." She took a deep breath, then added, "I choose you." For a moment, Dale seemed frozen in shock. Then, with a joy that transformed his weathered face, he pulled her into his arms. Zhen felt his heart beating against hers, strong and sure, as his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. Around them, the station had fallen silent, the usual bustle suspended as everyone watched the unexpected drama unfold. Then, somewhere, someone began to applaud, and others joined in until the platform echoed with cheers and whistles. Dale drew back, laughing with a lightness Zhen had never heard from him before. "Well, Miss Ouyang, it seems we've given Copper Creek something to talk about." Zhen smiled up at him, unembellished joy bubbling through her. "Good talk or bad talk? The very best kind," Dale assured her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with tender familiarity. "The kind where people say that sometimes fate has better plans than we do. What about Mr. Wang?" Zhen asked, a shadow of concern crossing her face. "Matchmaker arrange everything. Family expect marriage." Dale's expression grew serious. "We'll send a telegram explaining everything. If necessary, I'll repay any expenses he incurred. As for your family." He hesitated, understanding the gravity of what she was giving up. "I can't replace what you've left behind, but I promise to help you build something new, a life of your own choosing." Zhen touched his face, marveling at the unexpected turn her journey had taken. "My mother say, true path reveal itself when heart and mind agree. My heart, my mind say same thing now." Dale's smile returned, warming her from within. "And what's that?" "That wrong train bring me to right place." Hand in hand, they left the station, heading toward the wagon that would take them back to the ranch back home. As they walked, Zhen noticed Martha and Emily Wilson watching from across the street, identical expressions of delight on their faces. "Told you she wasn't getting on that train," Emily said to her mother, loudly enough for Zhen and Dale to hear. "Hush, child," Martha replied, though she was beaming. "But do run ahead and tell your father to add 2 more plates for dinner tonight. We have a homecoming to celebrate." The following weeks were a whirlwind of change and adjustment. True to his word, Dale sent a respectful telegram to Mr. Wang, explaining the situation and offering compensation for any expenses incurred. The reply, when it came, was surprisingly gracious. Mr. Wang expressed disappointment, but acknowledged that forced marriage would benefit neither party, and declined the offer of financial restitution. The more difficult communication was Zhen's letter to her family. She spent days drafting it, trying to explain her decision in terms they might understand, assuring them of her safety and happiness, and promising to send money home when she could. Dale added his own note, introducing himself and formally asking for their blessing, a gesture that moved Zhen deeply, even knowing that her family might never forgive what they would see as her betrayal of their sacrifices. The community's reaction to their unconventional union was mixed, but predominantly supportive. Martha Wilson took Zhen under her wing, helping her navigate the customs and expectations of frontier life. The local minister, after some initial hesitation, agreed to perform a simple wedding ceremony once he was satisfied that Zhen was acting of her own free will and understood the commitment she was making. They were married on a golden October afternoon, with the cottonwood trees blazing yellow against the blue Wyoming sky. Zhen wore a dress Martha had helped her make white, in the American tradition, but embroidered with red silk flowers in honor of her Chinese heritage. Dale stood tall and proud in a new shirt and his best trousers, his eyes never leaving Zhen's face as they spoke their vows. The small gathering of neighbors and friends who attended brought food and gifts, turning the simple ceremony into a community celebration. Even the station master came, bringing with him the news that he had been promoted to a larger station in Cheyenne, thanks to the story of you two, he told them with a wink. Made me something of a local celebrity, being the one who directed Miss Zhen to Dale's ranch that day. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Dale led Zhen away from the festivities to the cottonwood tree on the rise, their special place. In the distance, their home glowed with warmth and light, now truly theirs together. Happy. Dale asked, his arms around her waist as they looked out over the land that had brought them together. Beyond words, Zhen replied, leaning back against his chest. I never knew it was possible to feel this way, he said honestly. Like everything before was just preparation for finding you, Zhen turned in his arms to face him. When I leave China, matchmakers say American husband want traditional Chinese wife quiet, obedient, never question. She smiled up at him. You not want that kind of wife. Dale laughed, the sound rich and free in the evening air. I want exactly the wife I have, brave enough to jump off a moving train for what she believes in, smart enough to beat me at chess, and kind enough to see something worthwhile in a lonely rancher. Not lonely now, Zhen said softly. No, Dale agreed, lowering his head to kiss her. Not ever again. Over the years that followed, the Oakley ranch flourished under their combined care. Dale's knowledge of the land and animals complemented Zhen's meticulous organization and innovative thinking. They expanded the vegetable garden to include many Chinese varieties that proved well suited to the Wyoming climate, eventually selling the surplus at the Copper Creek market, where Zhen's exotic vegetables became highly sought after. Their first child, a daughter they named Lily after Zhen's mother, was born a year after their marriage. She was followed 2 years later by a son, Thomas, named for Dale's father. The children grew up bilingual, with Zhen teaching them Cantonese alongside English, and stories of both Chinese dragons and American cowboys filling their dreams. 5 years after Zhen's fateful detour to Copper Creek, a letter arrived from China. With trembling hands, she opened it to find a response from her mother, the first communication since Zhen had explained her decision not to marry Mr. Wang. The letter was cautiously warm, expressing relief that Zhen was safe and well, and a careful interest in the grandchildren Lily had described in her own childish letters. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was an opening a small bridge across the vast distance that separated them. Maybe someday they visit, Zhen said hopefully as she and Dale sat on their porch that evening, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. See that I find good life here. The best life, Dale agreed, taking her hand in his, though not the one anyone planned. Zhen smiled, thinking of the terrified young woman who had stood alone on the Copper Creek platform all those years ago, believing her life had taken a disastrous wrong turn. Sometimes wrong turn is right turn, she said, just not know it yet. Dale lifted her hand to his lips, his eyes reflecting the same love that had only deepened with each passing season. I knew it the moment I saw you, he said. I just didn't have the words for it then. What words? Zhen asked, though she already knew the answer. Fate, Dale said simply. Some things are just meant to be. As the stars emerged above their home, Zhen Ouyang leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, filled with gratitude for the mistake that had brought her exactly where she belonged. The wrong train, the right destination, a journey that had led not to the future that had been arranged for her, but to the one she had chosen for herself. And in that choice, she had found more than a home or a husband. She had found herself the woman she was always meant to become, in a place she was always meant to find, with the man she was always meant to love.